Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today is the last day of the month. That is July 31st. And what I wanted to do tonight was to share with you some information about Richard Rose, which is what I have been reading. And what I've been reading is this particular document or paper that was written by one of his students. Uh, his students was a gentleman named John Kent. And let's see if we can find it here for you. Let you look at it. Yes, this is the work I'm want to show you, and this is a book that was written by John Kent, and you can see what it's about here. It's looking for a doctor of philosophy and humanistic psychology. Uh, John Kent was a student of Richard Rose in the 80s. I understand, maybe a little earlier than that, I think. And I think Richard Rose encouraged him to go into the area of psychology. That was what he was doing at school or pursuing. And Richard Rose said that this is an area you should be pursuing. There were some students that were there that were going to quit, and he did not discourage. He told them to not do that. He told them that basically they need to pursue what they are doing and that they could be used in the future. So that was what he was trying to do, Richard Rose. So this is John Kent's work. John Kent uses approximately, wow, he must use close to 100 sources in this particular paper he puts together. Very well put together. One of the things that stands out to me about him is that he's able to piece it together. And this is something that Richard Rose did. Richard Rose talks about something that's very pertinent. He speaks about eliminating untruth. So what he was able to do as he continued to build and understand what he was doing, and this guy spent many years researching. Remember now, his background is he was a poor family member, and actually his parents could not even feed him. They were that poor that they sent him to a Catholic seminary in order to feed him. And this started at the age of 12. Now, what I understand the seminary was basically a way of preparing a person, a child, to a particular age, and he would become what we call be useful in the Catholic Church, either as not a friar, but as a minister for the Catholic school, or go on to pursue a master's degree or PhD level work and being a professor maybe at the highlight university would be Notre Dame here in America, which is the standout, what we call major university for the Catholics here in America. So what he found out was simply is that he was let down by these guys who were not involved in actually trying to discover God or the Creator, but already made up their minds based upon their doctrines and theses of what we call Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a brilliant man, but the problem simply is that it was the works of men. And at that point, they had already subjected themselves to the point of simply is this is the truth. They wasn't going to go any further, you see. And so that was all they're going to do. They're going to stick with what they had. And so part of my pilgrimage is a little bit different, but similar to what Rose is, although mine is much later in life. At the age of 39 years old, I entered seminary, but I was not a Catholic. I entered what they call a Presbyterian seminary. And what I was planning to be was not, I was going to teach as my goal. And my goal was to teach church history because I had already understood at a very age that most pastors themselves didn't understand church history. Now, I'm not saying I'm not going to give validity or support for what church history, whatever his way, such and such, but most pastors are not taught to study church history. They're just given numbers. They're taught how to preach. They're taught how to manage the congregation, and also they're taught to basically what we call study scripture. And so that meant simply is they would learn the Greek language and the Hebrew. So the New Testament being Greek and the Old Testament being Hebrew. And so that was what they were taught. And they were given only 2 or 3 courses while they were at seminary to elaborate on what we called church history. And that was just a simple general run by. So there was no specific periods of time. For example, and I won't go into a whole lot, but I'll just say this much. They never studied Augustine. They never studied Dietrich Bonhoeffer. What they would take is a class of what we call a run through of early church history, which would run from about right before 1500s, before the Reformation took place. And then afterwards it'd be the Reformation onward. They may teach another class somewhere that they wanted to take, whatever. But what I understand simply, that was it. But I'm trying to give you some groundwork here for you to understand where I came from and where Richard Rose. Do I have the truth? I feel I have the truth, what I'm seeing here, and I've been searching for it. But the problem is simply I have not gone through this whole thing that Richard Rose has done. I've been only involved with Richard Rose and his works since April. And I predominantly have read just about all his works. But as I continue to glean, I go back over them, and I haven't quit. And so it's going to be much harder for me, probably in some ways, simply is because I'm older, since I'm now 61 years old. But that's not the problem. The key is simply is you just strive to enter in. So what Jesus is talking about, and where if you remember the Sermon on the Mount and all these things, he uses what we call stories or parables to help people Jesus has downloaded what I would call a more simpler way for those who may understand or try to understand. And reality simply is it blew right by their heads because they had no idea what he was talking about. You see, most of these were adults. They had already clinged to their beliefs and their thinking and based upon Judaism. And they either saw this guy, Jesus, as a quote unquote, a religious leader or a miracle worker, but they didn't see him as someone who could actually has already done the work himself. And we don't know even if Jesus was really a real person, because if you analyze this whole thing, you can look at it simply as, well, scriptures is mostly looked by Protestants and Catholics as a literal interpretation of scripture. But is that really what's going on here? Or is there deeper, what I would call deeper perspectives here that's being relayed here? So let's go ahead and read some of this stuff from Richard Rose, The Psychology of the Observer, The Path to Reality Through the Self. And I won't probably get through this evening, all of it, but I just wanted to share this too. So here's a quote from Rose, and then we'll start on it with chapter 1. And this is basically all we'll do if we even get there at chapter 1 tonight. Is that we would call it simply as the origins and purposes. And this is Rose's quote here. I am a mirror that madness looks upon and sees a hope surmounting foolishness. This is from Rose in 1982. This book will present a system of transpersonal psychology called the Albinism system. This teaching is claimed by its creator, Richard Rose, to lead one to the direct realization of the absolute state of being, or in religious terms, union with God. Rose considered this experience to be the ultimate meaning of self-definition, the final answer to the question, that is, who am I? His work is devoted to fulfilling the Delphi Oracle maximum, meaning, know thyself, and all the gods and universe shall be known to you as well. Self-knowledge is the cornerstone of the temple. Richard Rose, the man in his search. Rose devised the Albinian system to be a comprehensive transpersonal map to the self. Now, I want you to understand simply is he started at age around 20 years old and began to look into this, okay? And he actually gave up, but he didn't really give up. He kept searching while he was in Seattle. And that's where he had his experience that completely changed his life. Okay. Rose was dedicated to the death of finding the truth. That's how much dedication he had. And I've shared this before, but I'll share it one more time. There were very few philosophical, psychological, and spiritual books that you could go and find in a library. And he lived in West Virginia. So he wasn't even near what we call a populated area, like maybe, Philadelphia or New York City or such, and that you could go to a library. But he was so keen, and we know he says this in his works, that there's people that helped him along the way. He would walk up to some person and they would share, he would talk and he would share with them, and they would give him a particular book for him to research. Not all the times, but such and such. And he would also get on a bus and go to a library that was, 150 miles away, to go to that library, and couldn't check it out, but he could read it while he was at the library, you see, which is something we don't have to go through, which is called the interlibrary loan here in America. But anyway, I've kind of got off that part, and I don't want to get too much in that. So one might justify to wonder at this point how Rose came to know about spiritual matters and by what right he claims to be authority on this subject. Good question. After all, if a student of truth encounters a teaching that proposes to guide one towards godhood at the expense of much time and energy and commitment, one should have some tentative confidence that the teacher's convictions have been validated by experience and are not based on mere conjecture or salesmanship. This very question was once posed to Rose as a lecture in which he was making a critical comments on evaluations about assorted religion, doctrines, and God concepts. The questioner may have been religious-minded and was offended by Rose's opinions, or perhaps himself had reason to be wary of possible one more fraudulent religious leader or teacher. Whatever the motive, the skeptic person asked a legitimate question, one which Rose too would have asked had the position been reversed. And that question was simply as the fellow asked, that is the person, the guy, you're talking a lot about God, but what makes you such an authority on God? And Rose faced him and unflinchingly replied, I am God. There was a tense and dead still hush in the room at the seemingly blasphemous, grandiose claim. Then he added, and so is each one of you. You don't get that taught in religion, folks. That's not taught in Christianity. You're outside. You're looking on the outside of yourself. That's not what this is about. It's internal, within you. The big difference is you don't know that. I do. So in reality, simply is Rose had experienced the mountaintop experience. And that most of us, if not all of us, 99.9999% people have never experienced what Rose has experienced. And there are students of Rose's, and there are others that have gone through this and have found the truth. But we're talking about a small number here, folks. Maybe 200 people, 300 people worldwide, maybe a little bit more. Rose's assertion is that he experienced the final goal state of the spiritual quest and thus is able to offer commentary and advice to fellow seekers. From that vantage point of realization, his stated desire had been to save people time and unnecessary hardship by describing what he considers to be the most direct path through the long maze of duality and delusion. His own search had been largely a blend of intuition, experimentation, struggle, and luck. From this process, and the answer from which he claims it culminated, he was able to define the essential principles of inner work that he feels every serious seeker needs to know, as well as point out the common traps and tangents that may seduce or divert the unwary traveler. So, we hear certain things in Scripture, seek what is within you. In other words, seek what's within you. not what's on the outside. And so the literal interpretation of Scripture is that Jesus was a man, you see, and he was someone who died on the cross based upon Christianity. And so he's going to save you. And Rose would say, no, no one's going to save you but yourself. You must save yourself. You see, you must do the work, as Gertrude would talk about. I know Spensky would speak of. Now, what is going on here is in the 1850s, we know simply is before this age, there was no study of what we call psychology, the study of man himself. It was based upon what we call philosophy, you see. And that was that's again to do with mostly on the outside, the exterior. It had very little to do with the internal part of who you are, you see. This is part of what I would say, looking for the consciousness of who you are. No one had actually even contemplated this type of thinking, you see. It was always projected outwardly. Referring to the factors that made for success and the destiny that seemed to shape his own life, Rose admitted that he had always felt himself to have been born under a lucky star. In retrospect, he considered himself to have been guided through different phases of search by unseen intelligence towards an answer he did not anticipate, nor would have desired. Then he goes into Rose entered a Catholic seminary as a teenager to study the traditional church doctrines. He found that the personal search for God was not encouraged there and was even actively thwarted. In other words, he was pushed away. We don't go there, Mr. Rose. We don't go there, Richard. You see. He was instructed. His desire for honest answers to questions about religious histories was not satisfied. He was instructed to believe that knowledge of theological dogma and devotion to the church was all to which one could or should aspire, as God was forever unknowable to the human being. So they had already made their mind up, which is part of the Thomas Aquinas. He's saying basically you can never know God, you see. That's why this is all built on Augustine's philosophy, all of it, you see, because the same thing with Augustine, he created the issue of original sin, which meant that everyone was born a sinner once they left their mother's womb. You say, well, that's not important. No, it is important, because simply is that man, it was saying simply man was not capable of actually being able to have communion with God. You see, the door was closed in Christianity. It had to be Jesus who had to do all the work instead of you doing the work. Part of this whole idea simply is that they made it so hard for people to understand things that they just accepted this gift that supposedly that Jesus gave to them, that you now had communion with God, and that they were instructed to be involved in church and do this and all these kind of things to become more Christ-like, and then you would be promised heaven in the future. Well, folks, that's the way they always do, don't they? Wait till you die. Well, this is totally opposite of that. You can know now. That is, if you pursue these things, you can know without a shadow of a doubt. Unlike Christianity, who tells you a promise or a belief, this is the opposite of that. It's a truth if you're willing to work for it. Okay? Rose was not willing to accept this as a conclusion to his spiritual search and left the seminary after a few years. In college, he turned towards science, working on the possibility that he could come to fully know the composition of matter and the workings of the physical world. He might be able to take an infernal step from there and discover the nature of metaphysical reality beyond his boundaries, and perhaps even the creator of the universe. So already Rose had begun to move in a different direction and said, okay, I'm going to look at science here. Let's see what they've got to say. Okay. After a few years of such study, he realized that this external materialistic domain of search would never lead to the comprehensive answer for which he was searching, but could only result in further fragmentation and completely without end. He did not think it was possible in one's lifetime to ever know all the factors and their internal interrelationship that makes up the physical dimension. And that even if it was, there was no guarantee that such knowledge would result in the spiritual understanding he really wanted. By this point in his early 20s, his intuition had developed to the point where he realized more clearly what he was after and what he might take to find it. The existential doubt about the value of life, while the nature and meaning of that life was unknown, grew within him. He had the conviction that life was not worth living if he did not know who was living and why, and that he must do everything he could do to find out. Having exhausted his hopes of finding philosophical truth through materialistic science alone, and with his religious upbringing still fresh within him, he began to suspect that much of the answer to his question about life could only be found from an objective vantage point outside of life, in other words, in death. He thought that possibly in the realm of death, the illusions and the limitation of life would be dispelled, and the true perspective on existence, as well as one relationship with God, would be found. At this point, he was still expecting the spiritual quest to culminate in the encounter with an objective, benevolent, personal God separate from himself. So Rose would also, this is all learning ground, folks. This guy's plowing the ground and plowing the ground, seeking truth. And he's digging deep. He's not a shallow thinker. So he's dismissed religion. He's dismissed science. And now he's saying, well, maybe let me find out simply is death. When you cross over, maybe you can find out something there if this was real. Rose would also later admit that much of his philosophical desire was motivated by fear. Well, yeah, of course, he was motivated by fear. He was seeking, he wanted to know the answer, fear of death, which all of us are fearful of. But as you get older, it becomes more pronounced in your life. Or dying in ignorance and the fear of oblivion. So with this as an additional motive, his curiosity led him to wonder how he could come to know about the reality of death. You see, the obvious answer that occurred to him was, if one wants to know what death is like, find a dead person and ask him. This took Rose's search into the domain of spiritualism. So now he's looking in a different direction. Although well aware of the dangers of desire-motivated hallucinations as well as outright fraud, his studies led him to believe it might be possible to witness genuine materialization of the souls of the departed and inquire into their knowledge and experience of the other side. But in this too, Rose was to be disappointed. After studying the psychic/occult world for a while and going down numerous dead ends in spiritualist exploration, Rose claimed to have finally experienced at least one genuine encounter with the astral remains of some deceased person in a seance. But the answers he received from them to his questions about the nature of the death state, the larger significance of life, and their knowledge about God or Christ were all vague, and the quality of presence of mind was mediocre. Realizing now that people do not automatically become wise just because they become dead. Rose was forced to conclude that they knew no more about reality than he did, and that indeed, as Christ stated, the dead know nothing. At this point, Rose arrived at a major insight about the nature of his path, one he was to repeatedly emphasize throughout his subsequently teachings. He realized that he would never be able to find the truth as a condition or state apart from himself. So this whole process here is as though he's going down the path and there are these things that hit him, and he's saying, okay, I'll look on this area over here. See, it becomes a disappointment. But he is still on the path looking for truth. He's not in a belief system here. That is so critical. He also intuited that the truth was not something that could be learned or acquired. In the sense of one looking for the ultimate philosophical conception, structure, or belief system to embrace and maintain. The answer would have to be somewhere inside himself, not out in the world of things and thoughts. His intuition told him that whatever the final answer might be that he hoped to eventually find, he would have to experience it personally and directly. He also sensed that for such an interior realization to occur, he would have to undergo some process of personal refinement. I lost my place here. Oh boy. Even to search for the truth as well as receive it, should the truth be found, he would have to know. Okay, there was another significant implication to the need for accurate self-definition. Okay. As the fear of death strengthened his urge for survival and there was little hope of the body becoming immortal, Rose realized he would have to be more precise to know who it was who was faced with death and exactly what aspect of himself might realistically hope for immortality. It was at this point that he made the commitment to himself that he would dedicate the rest of his life to doing everything he could to find God, or the final answer that incorporates all of life and death. He felt certain that this would be the most important thing he could do with his life, and that life itself would have no justification if this effort was not earnestly made. So this guy is a trailblazer. He is he's not quitting. He's not quitting. And while knowing that there was no guarantee of success, he consoled himself with the thought that at the end of his life, should he still not have found what he was after, he would know that he had not wasted his life chasing shadows and could face death with self-respect. Faced with the task of self-transformation, Rose wholeheartedly embarked on a multi-level manner search. From the age of 21 to the age of 28, he followed a strict yogi lifestyle, vegetarian diet. That's not vegan, that's vegetarian. Yoga, exercise, celibacy, and long periods of isolation. He studied every available religious, philosophical, and psychological teaching. He experimented with different forms of meditation. He traveled to find groups, teachers, co-workers, and systems of inner work. He isolated the principles and techniques from each source that seemed meaningful and applied them to himself. He studied himself intensely from all angles. He did everything he could do to find wisdom and God. This is it's far. I'm going to say it's far easier, but there now with the internet, you can find sources. You see, you can read books such and such. Doesn't mean that people are there searching for it, but it's completely opposite in his day that there was very little sources out there. That doesn't mean that the sources are good today. It just means simply there are more. But it's easier. You can do this through the internet somewhat, that you don't have to jump on a bus and ride hundreds of miles to a library or meet someone. You see, his personality, his whole drive in his life was not what we all have done in the past or doing, is that trying to either find a woman or the opposite, finding a man, getting married and settling down, having a family. That was not his preoccupation. Rose was rewarded with peace of mind and emotional contentment. He had tremendously vitality and mental clarity. He could see the beauty, wholeness, and perfection of the natural world. So he actually learned some things through this. Rose's assertion is that he had experienced the final goal state of the spiritual quest. I'm sorry, I got the wrong point. Sorry. He was in harmony with himself and walked in balance with the flow of life. He experienced mystical bliss. He was free of all external concerns, all temptations, and all fear. He was his own master and felt that in a sense. He had conquered the world. He imagined God was smiling down upon him from heaven. But yet after 7 years of this, Rose knew this was not the final answer he was seeking. A part of him was still seriously unsatisfied. He saw the grandeur of the world, but did not know what the world was or who created it. He felt the joy of life, but did not know what life was or for. These are questions you must ask yourself too. Why are we here? What is the purpose? Am I here just to eat, drink, and be merry and die? Is that all I'm here for? Or am I here to be in bed and get a thrill out of that and have sex with someone? Or whatever it is, to climb the mountain of economic, pursuits and have a mansion? Yet the sad part simply is you're going to die. And then also the phenomenon that to me asks is this: why is life so short? Think about that. I had a neighbor today who, what I understand, may have had a stroke. And I was over there, not with the family, but with someone else. We were talking. And the guy is, I think he's approximately 70 years old or 69 years old, as well as I recall. And he's having health issues. And I watched him in the last year and a half that his health is just continually, progressively get worse. And a lot of this is to do, he's looking into doctors when he maybe could actually solve some of these problems. But that's not the point. Life is short, folks. I can remember when I was doing such and such, and it seems like yesterday, but that was 30 years ago. So Rose became acutely aware of the passage of time and that the reflection in the mirror was becoming less flattering. He was forced to admit to himself that this long period of tranquility, accumulated by moments of ecstasy, did not really answer his core concerns about the real nature of existence. Furthermore, he was aware that death was always waiting in the wings to finally lead his experience of paradise. Rose began to feel that his quest for spiritual veridity was hopeless and wondered if he had not been kidding himself. So he began to have some doubts. In other words, he was beginning to wonder if he had not been kidding himself all along with a massive exercise in egoism. There's no longer seemed any justification for him to assume that God was around the next corner, ready to reveal himself. He had lived in expectation that at any moment the heavens would part, the bugles would blow, and the angels would descend in the golden chariot to greet him and whisk him away to glory. But as Rose rarely noted, they never came. With his reclusive ascetic lifestyle, he had also felt that perhaps the life and simple joys of an ordinary human being were passing him by. He had exhausted every form of inquiry and discipline he could think of, and it had not worked. He did not know what else to do, so he quit. Or rather, he tried to quit. He made motions to re-enter social life and pursue the more convenient goals of family and career. Yet, despite the conviction of seemingly futility, he continued to find himself in libraries, studying philosophy, doing his yoga exercises, and relentlessly examining the subjective issues that obsessed him. He became more frustrated. One reason for this was his being able to find little reliable information and experience guidance during his years of eager search. Rose did admit to going through much philosophical material during this period that was thought-provoking and served to bring up personal interests in issues which he needed to examine. He had read Blavatsky's Theosophical and Paul Bruner's work in particular. Still, Rose considered much of the spiritual teaching available to him to be either too shallow or simplistic or lacking in practical methodology, to be of much help in leading him to valid answers. He found most of the existing groups that he investigated to be filled with sham and pretenses rather than a mature, sensible approach to philosophical inquiry. But most infuriating to him was his discovery that too many of the spiritual teachers he encountered were indeed phony. He realized that they did not have the real goods, but often had motives with their students that were either mercenary, predator type, or sexual. Now, these are all discouragement, folks, you see. We also are persuaded by Scripture, if we look at it, ask, seek, and knock. And Rose does give an example of that. He says simply is that, yeah, you can ask and seek, but you don't knock with a thumb, you knock it with your head. Meaning simply is to try desperately to figure out what's going on up here. You see, part of Rose, part of Ouspensky, and part of Gertrude are actually seeking true psychology. Already what was taking place in schooling was that they were looking not at the mind, as we call it. They were looking in behavioral science. All this goes back to the Russian guy named Pavlov and the training of a dog and how to get him to be manipulated by food. This is what we call behavior. You see, but it's secondary. It's not the primary deal here, folks. That's the problem with psychology today. It is not primary. It's secondary, and that's why they can't help people only for what we call a short period of time, or either by giving them drugs or all kinds of things that actually don't solve the problems, because they're not going to the root foundation of the problem. Those experiences had a strong impact on Rose. It seems as though, before I finish here, there seems to be a enormous testing of Rose to find out if he was truly, truly seeking. And also, with this, he was able to chunk what I would call the junk that was being offered and realize that's not true. Chunk it. It has no truth in it. Chunk that too. Oh, that teacher, you throw him out the window. He's not worthy. So he was, as he's doing this, he's what we would call the arrow is going towards the bullseye, you see, and all this other fluff and stuff is being pressed away. So he knows that simply, I don't mess in that department anymore. I don't mess with this particular teacher over here because he's not about truth here, you see. And then if he does find anything, which he does mention here, Madame Blavatsky and Paul Brunner, then he holds on to these, what they share, you see. So he is gathering something, but they're small nuggets compared to all the other fluff that's out there. One result during this period was his making the vow that should he ever find anything or value at the end of his search, he would make it readily available to whoever was interested, plainly and without a fee. In other words, he was going to charge people to make money off of them. He was later to explain that he believed this vow to have been an important part of his formula leading up to his realization. He suspected that it might not have occurred had it not first made this commitment to pass along whatever might be given to him. You see, he was honored by some entity out here or creator or source, whatever, that really looked upon Rose's heart and knew that, wait a minute, we've got a keeper here. He's serious. He's not interested in making money. That's not his preoccupation here. You see. These experiences of frustration and disappointment in search, while proving to be grits for the mill of self-study, had a second and significant effect on Rose, one that may be reflected even in the tone of this report. This attitude is best summed up in his insistence that doubt should be the chief mode of inquiry rather than belief. In other words, okay, Richard Rose, you claim that you had this particular experience in your life. So how do you know that? How do we know you're not another fake like everybody else is? How do we know that? Yeah, you say you're not charging anything, or, which he didn't charge anything, or a very small amount, if I don't recall what it was, but it was not even. In fact, I know simply is that his speeches and talks that he went to university students, because he realized that was later on, this was his basic understanding. They were probably the best ones to actually pursue this. And this all occurred at a certain time phase. So this simply is, again, all of this is happening for a reason, but he doesn't know that at that point. So Rose learned the value of discrimination and rejection of the false or less essential throughout his years of philosophical investigation. He intuitively followed the path of negation and did not hesitate to criticize what he considered to be inadequate or altogether absurd. His aim was to arrive at a state of mind that was free of all impurity and not be misled into the complacency of an unproven and possibly unworthy faith. This combination of anger and discernment resulted in a style of teaching that stresses judgment, not acceptance. His views have sometimes been criticized as being negative, but to this, he rudely responds, negative to what? You see, you got to be negative and throw out the junk here, folks. Because we're talking about life everlasting. This is eternal life. By this, he means that the negation of negativity, the false, that is true positivity, as versus the indulgence in the affirmation of rationalization born of laziness and desire or fear that this term often really means. The seemingly irrelevant attitude likewise manifests throughout this report in the attention paid to Rose's critical evaluation of numerous philosophical and psychological issues that must be examined. In addition, his tendency to encourage turmoil and confusion in the seek or rather to provoke one to see that this reality is one usual state in the process towards genuine knowing will also be much in evidence, he explains. And he explains simply by saying this: if I can create a hypodermia, it has not intended for any sensitive posterity, but rather aimed at the heart and head. I feel that the time is short and that honest men will appreciate honesty in the long run. I wish to reach those who prefer to encourage wakefulness. That's from a quote from him in 78. Rose continues to walk his path, not quite knowing what he should do, yet playing the drama of life with one face and looking eagerly to heaven with the other. The tension between dual desires and the apparent impossibility of satisfying either tore him apart, it seems. Then what he refers to as the accident occurred. Whatever finally precipitated the crisis and transformation, whether a crack in the pavement or an errant thought, Rose would recall once the catalyst started, the change of mind, absolutely nothing mattered. I had no attachments beyond myself once I became more deeply. It would be indiscreet at this point, as well as create confusion, to describe the full nature and implications of that experience. The realization and knowledge that derived from will be much further referred to in chapter 17 in its proper context. It is sufficient at this point to state that Rose claimed to have had undergone a profound and traumatic change in being that resulted in his discovering essence or the self. He had arrived at that final form of existence beyond or prior to life and death. He had witnessed the entire universe along with Richard Rose in it. Disappeared, yet his eye as the nameless observer remained. He realized to be one with the absolute. In this experience, Rose found his answer once and for all. This realization of truth was not what he had been led to expect. However, the experience was not one of cosmic rapture or communion with the divine, Rose elaborates. You pick up a book on Zen and you read about Satoriya, which is the wow experience, the fellow says. I went to such and such ashram, he speaks of. I stayed there for so many months or years, and one day, wow, I know it. And I had a beer with the headmaster, and we went away laughing together. We got it. This is not enlightenment, folks. It's not. Because if this man had experienced enlightenment, they would have carried him out on a stretcher. That would be drastic. You don't die and then laugh and say, wow. Death is more final than that. So those who are telling you all this excitement are they're blowing smoke up your rear end. They're lying to you. It's not true. In fact, Rose when he had the experience that took place in Seattle, he had only one friend he could actually count on, who he corresponded with, and he lived in Ohio. And he said, I need to come and stay with you because right now I don't know how to handle life. And what happened was simply his ego was gone, per se. And whatever, your ego is, you've had it for, since, when you was 4 or 5 years old, after 4 or 5 years old, whatever the age you move away from your essence. And you see, now listen to me, he is not able to, he's emotionally weakened and he's not able to handle these things. So he goes to Ohio on a bus ride. And what takes place simply is this. He stays with his friend for probably, I think it's 3 or 4 months. And then he finally settles back down. But see, he died. He's died within himself. You see, a radical transformation, what took place. He discovered that simply he and God are one. Yeah, everybody speaks that language today, but they haven't had the experience. And unless you had the experience, it doesn't mean anything. And it doesn't. You can say you're one with God all day long. It's baloney. That's what Rose is emphasizing here, folks. It's not some cheap grace out here. And that's what this is being taught many places still. Not in a way simply as, I know God, such and such. Baloney. You don't know God. You don't even know yourself. You don't even know how you react in certain situations in life. So how can you not only know you don't even know yourself, how in the world will you know God? The experience showed Rose who he was forever. He realized the identity of the ultimate self from this vantage point on the other side of death. He was able to correctly view the real nature of life and the relationship of the realms of life and the death to the self. The self is your whole protective system within you. It's your other self. It's not the real self. It's the other self that projects out there. The quiet voice is your real self. But most of us don't hear the real self because simply is that the self on the outside doesn't want you to hear that. You see? Who did Rose discover himself to be? I recall once hearing the possibility of apocryphal accounts of the Buddha being asked by several followers who he was. They asked him, are you a god? Are you an avatar? A saint? A magician? A prophet? Who are you? Supposedly Buddha bluntly replied, I am awake. According to his testimony, this is who Rose is. The same one is awake in them both. Not only did Rose believe that his previous mentioned commitment helped provide the critical momentum necessary to propel him into this experience, he felt it was also responsible for his being returned into the world, what he now recognized as a dream dimension in order to share his discovery with whoever could hear him. He presents his offering this way. For those who are somewhere in between the folly of youthful hedonism and the indifference of old age, some system needs to be salvaged from the experience of those who managed to make a grand assault upon definition and who immediately found an answer. The intention resulted in Rose's beginning to talk about what happened to him and attempted to make contact with those who had like mind. Gradually, people gathered around him, and an exoteric school was formed to further the work. But this was actually, this he doesn't share this, but this is actually over 25 years later. More, you see. But Rose also ran into a Zen master here in America also. And this helped evaluate, you see, this is the beauty of Rose. He picked up on what was truth and he discarded what was untrue. He never wanted anything to do with untruth, and he put it away and threw it away. And what was truth, he held on to. And actually, Rose didn't even know what he was doing, that he didn't even know the teachings, you see. He was only interested in simply is knowing, finding out why he was here. What was his purpose? Not only did Rose believe that his previous mentioned commitment helped provide the critical momentum necessary to propel him into that experience, he felt it was also responsible for being returned into the world what he now recognizes as a dream dimension. I just mentioned, I'm sorry. For those who are somewhere in between, okay, we've done that. The intention resulted in Rose beginning to talk. So this happened. Rose called what we would call the group TAD, T-A-T, which meant standing for truth and transmission. He chose this name to signify that truth is the ideal, the unknown goal which is sought, as well as the primary means truthfulness in all ways by which the end is attained. Transmission refers to the ability of the fully enlightened teacher to convey a profound spiritual realization to a student who is ready to experience it, as well as to the efforts of the people within the school to help others on their own level of work towards the end. By this, the commitment is maintained and perpetrated. This dissertation, too, is part of this chain. And also, it may not be coincidence that the word tat, T-A-T, in the Hindu religion refers to reality, Brahman, or that which is. Still, given all this information, how is an honest seeker who does not wish to be deceived or misled to know for certain whether or not a teacher's testimony can be trusted? In a domain as abstract and as spiritual research and discovery, one's credentials to verify authenticity can finally only be a non-material, non-relative dimension. A higher level of reality cannot be measured or validated by the tools and standards of a lower one. Yet this very principle can be used by a false teacher as a ruse to deceive the naive, much like the humbug Wizard of Oz. Admittedly, anyone well-versed in mystical language or literature with a talent for communication and a charisma or authoritarian manner may profess to be a guru and can concoct and promote a teaching or for selfish reason rather than benevolent purpose. Other individuals may have a useful, though incomplete, teaching, yet claim their meditation techniques or psychological principles, for example, constitutes the entire path to godhood. Some may be sincere in their intentions, although erroneous in their convictions, especially if the convictions came from drug use or excessive emotionalism. Others may even be mentally ill and not know it, yet seduce the unwary or susceptible. Seekers find themselves in an awkward position without knowing in advance what enlightenment is, or even that such a state really exists. One must still have some reliable way of judging the worth of a teacher's offering before trading valuable years for the expected ticket to eternity. No exhibition of powers or expressions of profundity alone is proof positive of an individual's spiritual state of being, as magicians and scholars can provide the same display, yet without their having arrived at the source of all power and knowledge. God seemingly awards no doctrines, black belts, or gold medals as indicators of attainment. The enlightened person brings back no such souvenirs from the absolute to sustainably the claim of visitation. Rose admits that a person cannot know for certain the level of spiritual realization of another, nor can the latter claimant prove the reality of his state to the former inquiry through words or deeds alone. We cannot hope to know by relative mentation that which another has come to know or realize by direct mind experience. The only way the teacher's reality could be determined would be for the student to apply himself to following the recommended map out to its finish and experiencing the goal state personally. Also, in the special interest of transmission of the student's mind, when read by such preparation, can become one with that of the teacher, whose mind is ever-present, direct channel to reality. Still, how is a seeker who is looking for a reliable teaching with which to work to decide if the commitment to a particular path is worth making? Finally, a student has no choice but to go with whatever appeals to his intuitions. One has to follow the course that best suits one's own nature and capacity. Once the person knows himself well enough to maturely judge this and not be swayed by lesser desires or rationalizations or weaknesses. Other criteria for judging would be further discussed in the main body of this book. The most basic measure, however, is that of knowing the goodness of the tree by its fruits. A valid teachings will prove its worth to the student as each step is taken, with or without the teacher's personal involvement. At this category of spiritual work discussed here is aimed towards self-definition and becoming seekers can realize as they go along the extent to which the practice is resulting in greater self-knowledge, mental clarity, and mature being. When what he's talking about self-definition is basically simply finding out who you are. You're good, you're what you do, what's within you, what's good and what is bad, and where you struggle at. And part of the things he talks about is that there are traumas that come in your life, you see, and these are a test to find out. They're also what we call many ways to actually to get some type of a message to you, to basically to wake you up, to cause you to fall out of sleep. That is, you become aware. That's what traumas in a way are there for, to cause you to become aware and start questioning what path you're on. You see? Above all, Rose fully endorsed what we call Christ's declaration. He says simply, seek and you will find. His own individualistic and times uncertain manner of exploration suggests that how one seeks is almost less critical to success than the sincerity and determination with which one seeks. Also, Rose does not claim that his teaching is for everyone or is the only valid path. If I had a system, it is simply a system by which truth is reached by the continual analysis, not breakage, of various transcendental poses, and by a constant vigil over the many factors within the self. I make this statement because it worked for me and in my lifetime. The system is not new, nor mine alone. I only hope to clarify things a bit. His teaching is meant simply for those who recognize that it speaks to them. The voice calling the seeker home speaks different words through different mouths in order to be heard by different ears, but it is the same one speaking and perhaps listening. In its original form, The manuscript was a PhD dissertation, hence it's somewhat scholastically toned, for what I apologize to the non-academic researcher or reader. That's what this gentleman named John Kent is explaining. So he was basically sharing this out. I'm going to probably end here because I've gone over an hour, and I've gone through what I call basically the first 7 pages of this work. All I can say is, with what I understand here, what John Kent shares, and I've read most of Rose's works, like I said. I believe Rose is genuine, because I do see the fruit. I see that this man did what he said he was going to do. If he ever discovered the truth, he wouldn't charge people. And I know that simply as there was one of the TAT conferences I went to about almost 2 months ago, not quite 2 months ago. Some of them are already, you've got to see this now. Rose has been passed away in 2005. And all we have now is those of his students that were with him. And there have been others that have come along also. But his students are the ones who are now teaching. But these guys are getting older too. And mainly these guys are in their 60s and 70s. Some may be a little younger. Some are in the 40s. In other words, simply is this message needs to be done, help with young people. And younger, much younger than what the teachers are now. And my hope is in the next 2 weeks, to be at a TAT conference in North Carolina. And I hope to meet some of the teachers, which is what I plan to do, and build some relationships with people, and then move on, so to speak. So I feel that this is the truth, but it's not the only truth out there. Paul Bruner is one of those that Rose speaks of. And see, there are other teachers out there, but they never really give you the answer. They are what we call, Tully is one of those. He would be one who shares some things, but he doesn't go into a lot of detail. Eckhart Tolle, which is one who many people are following the last 15 years or so. And my concern simply is that, how do we know he is really, really who he is? Because he seems to be caught the attention of the media. And to me, that's kind of a red flag, you see, because most teachers of this nature are not going to be popular. And so Eckhart Tolle, to me, I believe simply is he's not who he says he is. I believe he's a wolf in sheep clothing. And I have a book or two of his. And so his what I've listened to, a lot of it's vague. It's not detailed. So that's also a misnomer to me. It's kind of a red flag. And that means simply steer away. But, most people have to experience this and go and look and find out, well, is this true or whatever, or not? And that's part of the process too, you see. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that with you also. I think this is pretty much going to be it tonight. I have not, this is the book I just got maybe a week and a half ago. This is another work by Richard Rose, but this is basically the writings of other writers in the East and the West that he speaks about. I have not started the book, to be honest with you, because I just have been swamped in certain ways, and I wanted to go back into what I would call the books I have of his. One of the things you can do, let me elaborate here real quick. Let me share if I could. Well, I can't seem to get the thing to work here for some reason. I don't know why. So let's see if I can try this again. It's not what I'm looking for. Okay, it looks like I've got an issue here with Apple Music, but you can actually can browse Richard Rose. There are what I call some things I've downloaded on this machine, and for some fucking reason, it won't show it now when I need to share it with people. But anyway, just you can go there and look up, browse Richard Rose, and it has his talks that he has shared with other people. And I don't know why it's having an issue here. Let me see if I can find something else. Um, don't know why. It just wants to continue to just stick for some reason. I don't know what's going on with this stupid computer. I'm sorry, but anyway, it's just how I feel. Okay. Well, I appreciate you listening, and I will let you just say goodnight. It's approximately 12 o'clock here on the East Coast, and I wish you well. Again, if you have any questions on Richard Rose, I've given you also, again, the website they have, and that would be to your advantage to look into that. If again, like I said, if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them in the future. Thank you. You have a good night.